In this video, we're going to look at the graphing capabilities of the TI-89. To do that, we're going to start by looking at these two functions, and we'll go ahead and put those into the calculator. The way we're going to do that, we're not going to do it on the main screen here. We're actually going to go to the y equals screen, and to get to that, you need to do green and then F1. You can see when you do that, that brings up the y equals screen, and this is where you can enter in those functions. So I'm going to enter in x squared plus 3x minus 2 as the first one. I'm going to hit enter. You can see that it puts it in there, and then 2x plus 6 as our second function, which is called y2. And then from this we can go to the graphing screen. The way you get to the graphing screen is by going to the green and then this F3 is going to get you the graph. You can see it says graph there. And you can see that it's currently graphing these two functions. It says busy down in the bottom. By the way, anytime your calculator says busy, if you want to stop it from what it's doing, you can hit the on button and that'll break break whatever it's in the middle of doing, and you can clear or go to a different screen. So now that we have these two functions graphed, what can we do? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to set our window so that it shows everything we want to show. So to do that, we're going to go to the green and then F2 is your window, and that brings up this screen, and you can see where we have the window set. I have this set at -5 using a negative sign, not a minus sign, to 5, counting by ones, and then from -5 to 15 on the y's, counting by ones as well. And that'll be a good setup for this graph. So I'm going to go back to the graph. You can see the two functions here. So one of the things you can do is, you can see the menus at the top here. You can go to F3. F3 is the trace feature, and what that allows you to do is that allows you to go back and forth with the arrow keys on the graph. If you want to switch to the other graph there, I was going backwards, left and right. If I push up once, it'll move me to the second function. You can see up here it tells you that you're on function number 2. If I go back down, function number 1. So you can just go back and forth by hitting up, and it'll just toggle between those. And again, left and right will trace over the graph. But that's not very useful because it just gives you these random numbers down here, and you can see the x coordinate and the y coordinates are given down here. What if you needed to go to a specific point? Let's say that you wanted to get to when x equals 2. You can actually just type in 2 and hit enter, and you can see that typed it in right to the x value, and it tells you that the y value is 8, and it shows you where that is on this graph. If you want to switch to the other graph, it might knock you out of the exact 2 and put you in a decimal, so then you can type in 2 again and hit enter, and it'll tell you that that's at 10. So that's what the trace menu or the trace function can do. The one thing you can't do is you can't type in something that's outside of the window. Remember, we went to x equals 5. If I type in 10, it's going to give me an error for the Windows variable domain. Okay. So that is tracing. And then there are a bunch of other things that this has the capability of doing. You can see that F5 is math. So I'm going to go to math, and value is just basically what we did with tracing. So we're going to skip over that. We're going to go to 0. So 0 is where the function crosses the x-axis. So if we wanted to find that 0 right there, we're going to tell the calculator to look between two numbers. So the lower bound, let's say -1, and notice I'm just typing this in, and you can see it put this little arrow here to say, oh, we're going to look between this and you can either type in another number, or you can move the cursor over. I'll move it to right there and hit enter again, and then it does the calculation, and it'll tell you that the 0 is at 0.561553, and that the output of that is 0. That should make sense. Okay. If we wanted to find the other 0, we could go to 0 again. Make sure we're on function 1, so we're on the parabola. we could go to -4. We know it's between -4 and -3. And you can see that it finds the other 0 as well. Okay, so that's how you can find the zeros. And again, you're making sure you're on the correct curve. So then the next thing on here is we can find the minimum. The parabola has a minimum, that point at the bottom. Let's start, and it's again, you're picking a point to the left of the minimum, a point to the right of the minimum, and it'll find the lowest thing in that interval. So if I go from -4 to 2, and again, you can only pick x values that are in the window, it'll calculate that. It's at -1.5. If you were to ask it to find a maximum, which is the next thing, there is no maximum like at a critical point. So if you typed in your lower bound to be -1 and your upper bound to be 3, it's going to tell you the maximum is going to be at 3, because this goes up like this, and when it gets to 3, that's going to be the highest point. Okay, so it'll find the highest point on the interval that you type in. Okay, so it's not actually finding like local maxes and mins necessarily, it's finding the absolute max and min on an interval. Next, we have the intersection. So you can see that we have two functions here. We have the line and the parabola. So what it wants you to enter in here when you select this is your first curve. Well, currently we are on the parabola, which is function number 1. I'm going to hit enter to select that curve. And there's function number 2, the line. I'm going to hit enter to select that curve. And then it's going to ask me for a left and a right point. We know that we want to go from here to here. And it'll tell me where that intersection point is. So you had to select the first curve and the second curve, and then you had to give it an interval to look on where they intersect. Okay. If you were to find the intersection and pick the first curve as 1, the second curve is 2, and you went from like -1 to 1, you can see that they don't intersect. And if you do that, it's going to think about it for a second. It's going to keep thinking about it, and then it's going to give you no solutions found because there are no intersection points on that interval. Okay, so that's the intersection. The reason you have to select the curves is if you have more than 2 functions graphed, you would have to pick which functions you were looking at. Okay. The next thing that you can do from this math menu is you can find the derivatives. So in this case, when you get to derivative, if I hit the right arrow to open that up, it gives me a subset here of dy dx. So I can find dy dx. Basically, this is going to find the slope of the tangent line at the point that I type in. Let's say I type in 1. It's going to tell me the slope of the tangent line is 5. Okay, so at that point right there, the slope of the tangent line is 5. If I were to type in, and again, you can use the numbers here too. I'm going to find the slope of the tangent line, say at -1.5. You can see that it's 0. That's that minimum, that critical point, and it can find that for you. Okay, so you just have to type in the x value that you're looking at in order to do that. And then the last thing that we need to look at with graphing is the integral. So we can find the integral. We'll say we're going to find the integral from 1 to 3. So we'll type in a lower bound of 1, the upper bound of 3, and you can see that it's going to find that area. Remember, an integral is the area under the curve. It shows you what that area looks like, and it says that it's 16.6667. Okay, so for integrals, again, you just have to make sure you're on the correct curve, because if we wanted to, we could find the area under the line as well. The one thing you might want to do after you've shaded something in, you can hit F4 and it will redraw these. So make sure you're on the correct curve, and then when you do the integral, you'll have to pick the lower bound and the upper bound. So just to finish this out, I will do the integral of, I'm going to move to the second curve so you can see what I'm on. the second curve it says 2, and we'll do from 1 to 3. And I'll get that area is 20, and so you can find it on the different curves. Okay, so that is some of the things that you can do when you are on the graphing menu. Again, you start by plugging in your functions in the y equals, and then you can go through the graph and do those kinds of things. In general, I don't recommend you use the zoom, just because fixing the window to what you want it to be allows you to keep it focused. If you zoom, it'll throw off. If you just say zoom in, you don't really have a lot of control over where the axes are and stuff, and you might get some weird graph that you don't really know what the x and y values are. So I'm going to stop that there, and that is using the graph.